before we get into the panel, I wanted to also just share a little bit about what we've been doing at YAP Global. Bobby had kind of given us a great overview of the market, a lot of charts, a lot to keep up with, and that's something that we do at YAP Global. But if you're new to crypto, or you're in terms of level, you're like maybe in the beginner or like intermediate, even advanced, there's so much to cover in this space. So this year we've launched The Context. It's a newsletter which just helps you look beyond the headlines and just figure out, what are the 3 things you need to know in a week in crypto. And so, yeah, if you're keen, do check out The Context, but we'll get into the panel. So yeah, there's a roaming mic, so you'll have to share that. But yeah. So, okay, before I begin, please let me introduce, we've got Ahmed Al-Balaghi, co-founder and CEO of Biconomy, a multi-chain relayer network that simplifies the Web3 experience. Welcome, Ahmed.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Thanks for having me.
And we also have Will Harborne, co-founder and CEO of DeversiFi, focused on making DeFi yield and trading opportunities accessible from one easy and low friction interface. Welcome, Will.
Thank you.
And yeah, happy to have Will and Ahmed join us with Bobby again. And so right now I want to delve into the emergence of crypto ecosystems. Now, as I touched on, Bobby gave a great analogy of what what multi-chain ecosystem is and what is happening. And Bobby touched on that when he spoke about cross-chain bridges and how, yeah, it is very complicated. And so really want to get into where it's all heading. But before we begin, can one of you explain why the need for multiple blockchains? Because sure, most of us know Bitcoin and Ethereum. I think in the last year, the crypto market has taken off, and those 2 coins have grown in their price, and so that has garnered a lot of attention. But yeah, why the different blockchains like Solana and like Avalanche?
Yeah, so I think maybe just over a year ago, let's say a year and a half ago, it was still believable that there might be one chain, which would be Ethereum, where all activity would take place. And I think Bobby's right in that today, it's very clear that the multi-chain is here to stay. There were all these different blockchains with different activity. And the reason that happened, I mean, there are a few different reasons, but actually it's the same reason that DeversiFi was initially built as well, in that there were a lot of issues using Ethereum because so many people wanted to use it, but its capacity was limited. And many people were experimenting, building all sorts of applications, but the basic blockchain space was expensive. And so since then, many new chains have launched in order to kind of solve some of those, or what they saw as the issues, using all sorts of different approaches. So you've got some chains that may replicate Ethereum's EVM capacity so that you can deploy the same kinds of smart contracts, others that have changed that as well, and a whole explosion of different ways of solving the same problems. But what it means is there's many other chains now which are much cheaper, or which may have different governance, or all sorts of different constitutions, similar to the country analogies that we had before. There's really kind of different states which have chosen different models of governance and different tax systems and everything else, and all this differentiation. So this is kind of a really interesting experimentation ground, and we're seeing all sorts of applications launch. But it's likely, in my opinion, that we will also see a kind of narrowing down in a year or 2, maybe even sooner, as some of these models sort of outcompete each other and get more adoption.
Awesome, thanks for that. Bobby, could you shed a bit more light into the ecosystems that have emerged in the last year? Because what we've seen is, it used to be, there used to be like one main conference to go to, like CoinDesk's consensus, right? But in the last year, we've seen like Solana conference, a Near conference, like Cosmos conference, and you just came from an Avalanche conference. So we're seeing all these different, ecosystems. Could you shed a bit more light on what that looks like and what's been happening?
Yeah, I think things have kind of gone its own way. Everyone's kind of forming its own ecosystem, and then everyone's got a lot of cash. Everyone's want to do their own thing. So nobody wants to do one conference to feed them all again. But in general, like what we're seeing is that everyone's got a unique take on what for their chain. And I think to really compete, I mean, there's only so much that you can say. You can kind of have cheaper transactions and more higher throughput, because if that's what everyone is saying, then there's no differentiating factor. So we'll probably see a specific chains being very good at certain things. And I mean, to some extent, we started seeing this. We started seeing Flow blockchain, which is created just to focus on NFTs. We have Ronin, which is created just to focus on games, for example. Avalanche has started doing this thing, and the way they try to scale is by using subnet, and they have games like Krabada and DeFi Kingdom building up their own subnet, which to some extent like a layer 2, a chain by itself on these things. What will the other chains do to differentiate themselves? Polygon's got different ways of scaling the thing. It's probably going to be complex for all. But yeah, I think all of these chains will have to find its own niche to kind of differentiate itself and to retain users. Otherwise, it's kind of the same thing everywhere else.
Yeah, Ahmed, I was going to ask for you to touch on what Biconomy does and how you're bringing this all together. If you want to kind of share.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like, I totally agree with you guys here, because like how we saw even just the emergence of these like different ecosystems was as we were building infrastructure to sort of enable developers to make their applications easier to use. We saw that like these applications were like, this was around a year and a half ago, going to Polygon, or they're going here and there, and we're just like, okay, people are not really building on Ethereum. And it was just interesting to see sort of this explosion. And I actually think like multi-chain is here to stay even in the next 10 years. I think that because if you look at the world, we are constrained by the amount of land that we have. Therefore, there could only exist X amount of governments. Right now, anyone could build their own, let's say, monetary policy or central bank and create their own ecosystem, right? So that's 7 billion potential central banks. Of course, that's definitely not going to happen. But the point is that the fact that this is such an open space you're going to have more people saying, you know what, I want to build a contender to Ethereum or to Polygon or to X and Y and Z. It's difficult, it's hard, but we're probably going to see a bit more, and we're definitely going to see niches as well. And for us at Biconomy, we're seeing ourselves as the glue to all of these different ecosystems, and really we're building infrastructure to really enable people to access these chains easily, and also for developers to deploy across these chains as well. So yeah.
We've spoken about the multiple blockchains, but Will, DeversiFi is built on Starkx, a key Ethereum Layer 2 rollup. Could you explain what Layer 2 solutions are, just to add another layer of complexity to what's going on?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, Ethereum was where everything was being built, but it didn't have the capacity to handle all of the applications and users that wanted to be using it. One solution was that kind of emerged organically was all these other chains launching, which is this kind of multi-chain we have now. But Ethereum itself also had another approach to solving this, which is really based around Layer 2, which is adding another layer above the blockchain where a lot of these transactions can happen at much lower cost, but really inheriting the security of Ethereum. That can happen using something called zero-knowledge proofs, or there's also another way with using optimistic rollups. And basically, it allows you to have a lot more transactions at much lower cost. So that's the approach that DeversiFi was built on top of. So the core of our platform, which is aimed around making it possible to trade or invest and earn yield on your assets, but from your own wallet, just like you would on any blockchain, uses this. So you are getting the security of Ethereum, but using this other technology. Of course, when it was kind of first imagined a few years ago, it was thought this would be the main way that the kind of DeFi ecosystem scaled. And now I think it's very clear that it has to sit and exist alongside of multi-chain. And I think it still has a really important role to play, which is that actually most assets are still centered around Ethereum. So even these other chains, many of which are growing their TVL very quickly, a lot of the assets are bridged over from Ethereum, which is where the majority of them originated. And that's going to remain the case for at least quite a while from now. And as we can see on Ethereum Layer 2, you kind of get to the same, basically they're still existing in the same ecosystem, and bridges you don't have to worry about the security of them. Whereas when you might bridge them over somewhere else, we've seen huge hacks where they're lost. And so there's quite a difference in the parameters there, and a few other sort of differences which really mean that Ethereum Layer 2 is now just coming into its own. And I think we might see kind of growth in the relevance they play in this multi-chain ecosystem, but we do have to acknowledge they now exist kind of not as the only solution.
Quick jargon catch up. So TVL, total value lock. So that's where all the like volume that we talk about on all the charts that Bobby showed us, and zero knowledge proofs or rollups. Could you explain what that means?
So zero knowledge proofs are kind of the real sort of step change technology which have enabled a lot of this to happen in Ethereum. So basically you're compressing together thousands of transactions into a very small amount of data and just putting that onto the blockchain rather than putting the full transactions themselves. So it means that you can basically fit a lot more into Ethereum or any chain that's using them.
So really, these different blockchains and also layer 2 solutions is just to find more scalable and like faster ways to kind of grow applications. But yeah, how will adoption play out, Ahmed, in terms of the user friendliness of building on these chains and blockchains? Could you expand on what that's like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for us, for us at Biconomy, we're really focused on, like, when we started out, it was all about how can we make Web3 seamless and frictionless to really just see more adoption. Because when we started around 2019, there were probably a couple of thousand daily active users. Now, we have maybe a couple of million daily active users, but that's, nothing compared to, the traditional applications that we use. And so for us to get to, we've got to, I'd say, as an industry, from 0 to 1, but how do we get from 1 to 100, right? And we feel like a lot of the ways that people interact with wallets, transactions, gas, are just, complex in nature. And so for us, what we've been very focused on is what we think is how we could really just provide a great gas abstraction layer that developers could easily utilize, so that their end users don't necessarily ever have to pay gas, or they could pay gas in different ways, like paying gas in different tokens. Because imagine you're using USDC on Ethereum or Polygon or any of these chains, you always need the native token of that chain to do a transaction. And so it's thinking about how could you sort of abstract this tax, let's say, right? Either to make it free, you don't pay tax, right? I mean, who doesn't pay tax, right? But also maybe paying tax in different ways, or maybe, allowing you to sort of save on those costs as well. So we're very much focused on that sort of middleware, which would enable that adoption that we believe will get us to
right. So Biconomy is here to save you on tax by using crypto applications. Bobby, how do you think that the adoption of all of this will play out? Like, will there be a winner, or we're saying multi-chain future is here to stay, but how are we going to navigate this?
Yeah, so I mean, this whole multi-chain thing came out because Ethereum kind of lost the game, I would say. I mean, Ethereum had the lead, it had 98%, but when I first started playing started using DeFi, like it cost like, I don't know, pennies to kind of trade on Uniswap. We can't expect a new guy to come into the space and spend $50 on a swap on Uniswap. Like, it's impossible. If you want to make like $10 swap, like, it doesn't make any sense, right? The transaction fee costs more than the actual swap itself. Then, so other entrepreneurs saw an opportunity in the space to kind of build this with like low transaction fees, and they built this. I don't think they will. There won't be a single chain to do them all. I think there will be a multi-chain future. There will be hundreds of chains in the future. Like Ahmed has said, how it will play out and all is something that we will observe. Yeah.
You make a good point though, because people are entering, DeFi and crypto and different chains. I mean, it's like Solana was the next one, now Avalanche, and then Terra now this year. Is it kind of like a race for these blockchains to bring the people, bring the citizens?
Yeah, I mean, I like to use this analogy. I spoke to a few of you here. I mean, we've talked about how software is eating the world, and there used to be a time where there's a tech sector where like this group of companies that are in the tech sector. But these days, like every company is tech enabled. Like it doesn't that every company uses tech, every company uses software. I view the same as blockchain. Blockchain is going to eat the world, and in the next 20 years, like every company is going to have a blockchain layer in their software stack. And what this means is that we probably have, 10 million users in crypto these days, but there's 7 billion people in the world, and like a significant majority of them, anyone with an internet connection will probably be using blockchain, whether directly or indirectly. Most likely indirectly via your phone or application or games that has that stores some data on the blockchain. So that's kind of where I think it will be. There won't be one chain that can fit them all. There will be multi chains to kind of fit all these purposes. And I think someone told me this analogy before. If you think about it, like the cost of storing anything online, or the compute cost as well, follows the Moore's law, which kind of decreases, halves every few years or so, and every time the price halves, like the capacity increases, and that encourages increasing adoption and use cases. So what we're seeing is the same case in crypto these days. Like you would think that like as you increase capacity by adding more blockchain, by adding more layer ones, like there's no use for that then, but actually encourages, there's all this spare capacity that encourages usage and adoption, and that will drive demand for the future. So that's kind of one thing, and it kind of builds a virtuous cycle as well.
Yeah. Just one more thing to add as well, like as part of the just general adoption, I don't think any user would have to know what chain they're on. So when they're interacting with an application via their wallet, they might have these multiple assets on these different chains, but the idea should be that it should be abstracted away. We were actually having an internal hackathon at Biconomy the past 3 days, and 3 team members actually came up with a wallet which they called Chainless, and literally they swapped $50 of USDC on Polygon, and managed to get 150 USDT on Ethereum because they had some USDC on Ethereum, and they just did that sort of bridging and transaction all in one without having to do it, which was really cool to see. I still don't get how they did it, but the idea is that you're going to have all these different chains, and for the advanced people they'll probably go into that, but for the 99% of normies, they probably wouldn't need to go into these advanced page reading.
Question for both Will and Ahmed. I mean, do you think there are trade-offs that Web3 and crypto applications need to make in order to become a bit more user-friendly for everyday users?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental trade-off that's being made, let's say, versus a centralized exchange, is that you have more control, but you can also access more opportunities. So what's being built in Web3 and decentralized finance is this ultra-connected web of blockchains, but also applications, and you can connect to them all with one wallet. You don't need to go up and sign up to 5 different websites and put your email into each of them and maybe give them your credit card. You can get it all from this one place that you already are. And so you're kind of trading off maybe some of the protection that you get from centralized service for this, and the user experience as a result until now has become very fragmented. There's all these different chains. It's really complicated to use. People forget their passwords or lose money or whatever else. I think those things are being solved and will be solved. And I think in the future, particularly, you won't necessarily need to know and interact, as we said, kind of with all of these 10 different chains that you might want. You'll probably have one wallet that behind the scenes can bridge over to wherever you need to bridge and access services. So today, for example, on DeversiFi, you can get yield from Terra on your assets and earn, I think, 19% or so, which is basically Anchor protocol on another blockchain, but you're doing it with your Ethereum wallet, and you don't necessarily need to bridge over, pay gas fees in the native currency. And I think that experience will become more and more common as this stuff matures, so that most people aren't going to care about the underlying chain necessarily, but they will care about the impact that can have on what they can do.
Yeah, that's good to note because the cross-chain bridging, I mean, Bobby pointed it out in his presentation. The concern is the hacks that are happening right now, and Axie Infinity was a big one. And yeah, for users and I guess for newcomers, they're probably like, what's going on? Like, is it safe for us to use this? And the bridging. So are you guys saying that when will we see a time where we don't have to worry about the bridging? Or is that still going to be is it still kind of early days till it matures?
Wait, so you're saying there's no risk on Ethereum or Polygon at all?
No, as in like, not worrying about the cross-chain bridging because that's where all the hackers are paying it,
Well, in Ronan's case, I mean, given the team and like how incredible they are, it was such a noob mistake, right? It's like me putting my wallet here and, well, actually no, putting it inside a bag, and I just left my bag and like anyone could just take it, right? Like that, it could have been easily, solved, and they could have done like way better security measures, right? And I think these, it's unfortunate that these things have to happen for teams to, for teams to really be serious about how they, architect their security. But it's also like what's also happening in the space is that we're having this sort of trade-off between going to market and security, right? And like, for example, Polygon doesn't really have the best security in the world. They've improved, but when they went to market, they managed to pretty much kill the market and win, right? Now, will this work for cross-chain bridging? I mean, who knows? Like Layer 0 is kind of taken the page from the Polygon playbook. Whether that will work or not remains to be seen, because there's way more, security issues on a cross-chain side that needs so much resolving, because everything is still pretty much, hackable, because it's run by like a 3-person multi-sig or whatever it is. And so there is more concern cross-chain bridging for sure, but over time, I don't think that will be the case. We'll have, zero-knowledge proofs will on the bridge side will allow for way better security, and more and more teams will be able to figure out.
Yeah, cool. What do you think, Bobby?
Yeah, I actually hold the same view. I mean, it's the Wild West for crypto these days. I would say cross-chain bridges today was kind of like Mt. Gox in the crypto days, early days. So you need to go through a few massive hacks, and then eventually the weak teams just disappear, and then the stronger teams emerge. And the longer they stay on, like, as long as there's no changes, like, because hackers are constantly attacking all these things. If it's not stolen by then, it's probably safe, unless contract upgrade then. So it's a race again. But generally, that's the same view. Things will improve over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're saying it's a Wild West. I guess there's opportunities, but a lot of risks that come with that too. Okay, looking ahead, for everyone here, what are your predictions in terms of, who will be kind of more dominant or the leading chain, if there will be one, or will it be back to Ethereum? I mean, what do each of you think? You can start off, Bobby.
I think it's a coin flip at this stage. What is happening right now is the data is very skewed by all these chains throwing insane amount of money to build their ecosystem. So whichever chain that and the entire use case as well is very subsidized. You can think of multiple Ubers kind of operating in London, and everyone's trying to throw money to get the drivers and the riders on the chain. So whoever that's paying more money, I mean, come on, if Uber's giving free rides, why would I take the tube and just take an Uber, right, for example? So that's kind of what's happening. You have people paying 20% interest on your USD stablecoin deposits, so that's why everyone's depositing their money in Terra or UST. So whoever that pays, but the question is how long and how sustainable can this be, and what's stopping someone else from creating a new chain and throwing all these incentives again? So I think this thing will go on for quite a few more years, just like how the tech industry has gone on and subsidized all these consumer applications for a few years. So it's a coin flip. At some point, the ecosystem that run out of cash will probably see their user numbers go down. They need to find ways to kind of get people to use the platform without any subsidies, just like how Uber needs to find its own a way to get people to use the ride sharing app without incentivizing them. So that's kind of how I think about things. So Ethereum probably will still stay on as the main main chain, main smart contract platform. But the rest is coin free for me.
It's great assessment. Yeah, I totally see it.
No, I definitely agree with Bobby here as well. One thing I think about a lot is when are we going to have sort of zero knowledge proof on whether it's rollups on actual chain. I think we haven't had an all-star like layer 1 or sort of a rollup that's come out and have taken the market by storm with zero knowledge proofs and just generally privacy. I think we have not even seen any we are seeing implementation, but we haven't seen a full out go to market for any of these solutions that that are building with private blockchains, or what that could mean, because will we see users wanting to go and use chains where there's just full on privacy, and so that if you're you could do essentially whatever you want, right, and nobody could see what you're doing. And I feel like we're still so early that there are still so many trends, so many things that people work on they haven't materialized yet. So that we're probably going to see many this sort of, let's say, cycle, right, that Bobby described. We might see that for privacy chains,
yeah,
right? or other trends that we'll see. And so I just think this is going to be a circus, really.
A circus, exciting.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think particularly having 10 chains that are all very similar works for a while if they're throwing huge amounts of incentives, but I think that's not going to be sustainable. And the ones that are able to differentiate themselves the most will be the ones that survive. So if you want to compete with Ethereum, copying the EVM and adding a less secure chain but huge incentives might give you a year of one way. But if you can't build a sustainable differentiation long term, there's no reason why people are going to keep building there. They're going to go back to one of the other chains. So Avalanche and Polygon, for example, initially maybe made some compromises and copied or used the Ethereum virtual machine, but have differentiated themselves since and are really making interesting innovations which might give them enough room to survive. But there are many other chains that might not manage to do that. Similarly, this idea of application-specific chains, building privacy-focused chains, or in Cosmos, you have the idea that you can create a chain specifically for one application that might be a game or NFTs or whatever else, and optimizing it for that really can give it kind of a longer term sort of space to thrive in. But I think it will come down to that and less about the incentives over the course of 5 years.
So really, is it down to the tech, the token? Yeah, all that comes down to the tech. Go for it.
One question. So in the app-specific chain, because the thing is that for app-specific chains, they generally will just have their own ecosystem, but it necessarily doesn't mean it will be composable. How if you were to deploy Polygon, Avalanche, these would be, of course, all these apps are composable. I haven't really thought about this, but if I could ask you a question, what do you think the ratio would be between applications built on chains where there's just so much composability versus app-specific ones?
So I think it does come down to having a good inter-communication protocol. So Cosmos is a good example, and I think does give an idea of what Layer 2 Ethereum will look like in a year or two, in the sense that it was built with this inbuilt inter-blockchain protocol, which lets you connect all these different application-specific chains. So although the chain itself can be optimized for that one use case, it has a native way of connecting to 20 other chains, and there are already quite a few in that ecosystem. Ethereum Layer 2 has that sort of potential as well, in that each rollup can be optimized for privacy. You have Aztec now, or swapping, which might be DeversiFi, or whatever else, something for NFTs, but you're able to connect with a much more native, secure bridging protocol rather than one that's tagged on later, as we're seeing kind of today between different chains.
Cool. So there will be a circus. in the coming years, as long as there's money kind of pouring into the space. Before we kind of go into questions, yeah, just one last question. Let's just look at this year and what maybe people in the audience might want to know you're paying attention to. But like, what are each of you most excited to see this year in this whole emergence of crypto ecosystems? You can start, Will, and go down.
I'm personally really excited to see privacy applications. So I think there's been a lot of sort of early stage experimentation of this, but actually there are around 4 or 5 like new chains, or at least like side chains that are going to launch with fully private transactions in all sorts of different ways. And that's something that I think is really needed for kind of mainstream adoption of using this technology, because today you can see every single person's transaction history, and that's never going to be something we're happy with when everyone's using it.
I'm personally interested in seeing how the layer 2 ecosystem will develop the rest of the year. There's been a lot of hype behind layer 2 just for these layer 2s on top of Ethereum, and this is the year of L2 2022, so L2
2022. There we go.
So I just want to like see it, like, because there was so much hype behind them last year, but like you just saw all these other ecosystems just rally and just gain all this attention from developer ecosystems, and yeah, I'm just really interested to see like when that would occur for the L2s in the space.
For me, I don't know. I think 2022 is going to be a challenging year, especially after what we had for the past 2 years. But I'm personally quite interested to see what will be the next thing that will capture the attention and imagination of the mainstream audience. Last year was NFTs, which kind of surprised me in the sense that people started trading all these different penguins and apes, for example, cats. Yeah. But my guess is, I mean, there's hundreds of teams that have raised funding to build GameFi apps. So I'm curious to see if any one of these teams will emerge and kind of build a challenger to Axie Infinity, or at least have a scale as large as Axie Infinity for game. I mean, if there's 100 teams, maybe there's one that will be successful. So I'm not so sure, but I hope there will be one to kind of bridge and get more mainstream people in crypto.
Just one more thing as well is we've been seeing a lot of Web 2 interest into Web 3 now, right? Whether it's all these like gaming companies, esports companies, and now we're in sort of the financial district in London. I'm also really interested to see like how all these banks and incumbents will actually move into the space. Some of them could hold crypto legally, most of them can't hold crypto. And so like what does that mean? Like most of them already have an agenda, and we're sort of talking to one of them now, and it's just like they have like this like crazy like angle in terms of how they think about blockchain, but now they're moving away from private blockchains, thank God, and now looking into public blockchains, because that's where all the activity is and that's where the real innovation is. And it will just be really interesting to see like, it might not be this year, but it's like, we already saw that they're starting, right? So it's just interesting.
Yeah, certainly this like institutional move into DeFi, but yeah, I guess both ways, like the traditional financial kind of institutions, trying to adopt this, but they are definitely looking to public blockchains. So and in the meantime, Bobby is just gonna earn from walking. So everyone, we can all do that. We're still early. No, thank you guys so much. We've got about maybe 10 more minutes of questions. We have one mic, so we'll move around. But any questions, please put your hands up. Lito's hands up. Oh, there. Cool. Take a while. Thank you. Sweat coin? Where's that?
It's been around for like 4 years.
I had a question for you, Will. You mentioned privacy tokens. I've been looking at them recently, and a lot of them have been, like Monero, for example, has been rising in the last 30 days. I think it's up like 35%. Some sources have been saying that this is due to like the Ukraine crisis. So I was wondering if you had any insight onto that as to why these privacy tokens are doing so well, specifically in the last 30 days.
I mean, I don't Yeah, I think there's some speculation, for example, that it could be Russian billionaires moving money. I think it's more likely that people have seen that it's possible to have weaponized finance where the governments of the world turn their attention on an entire country of people, for example, Russians or Ukrainians, and cut off banking. And so having a private money sort of becomes a lot more obvious to a lot of people wherever you live as to why you actually might want to hide your finances from not just like your friends and other people looking at the blockchain, but actually your government as well, because there are many protections that gives you. And I think that narrative is probably one which will keep growing and has been emphasized a lot by that crisis.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. In general, it was quite consistent, but I have one question. There was a lot of discussion in terms of there will be a lot of different blockchains which gonna be like working together with each other, so to say. But specifically from my side, like I come from compliance background, so question is for me is always like in terms of how you gonna monitor the transactions, because probably you're aware of fast travel rules. So right now there is like a need to identify the wallets, and how it is going, it's like completely insane for me, because you're having like centralized entities which are sharing information through the APIs. So basically you have like two different types of information flows which are going through the network. So in terms of the question, whatever, well, there could be like one chain which would rule them all. Do you think that like there could be like blockchain ID solution which would comprise of solely not like engaged in anything apart from identification of the players on the network, like for different chains to bridge in between?
That's a really good question. Look, ID is tough. Like the first project I actually ever worked on was blockchain identity, and it's like the hardest thing ever, because when it comes to every single country in the world has different ways, in how they identify people. So there's no one standard in the world. Let alone, a standard in an emerging technology where nobody really cares about having your ID, right? Because you could track this person's, let's say, all the credentials that they've had through all the different ways they've been interacting with, let's say, DeFi applications or NFT applications, and make a sort of view, right, of this particular individual. But not many people want to really sort of give their names, right? And for these applications that are built in a permissionless way, even for them to go out and have to sort of have this sort of, let's say, ID requirement is more, of a, it's more troublesome for them as well, right? I would definitely say when it comes to applications that would have to tie in between, the financial world and the digital world, there will be that, and we're seeing that with all these exchanges. There's no exchange right now that you could sort of log into without you having to give your passport information, right? And I think what we'll see is we'll live in a world whereby we'll have this whole permissionless space that really does not require any ID, and that will just, governments have to realize that this will be a fact, right? Because in a way, and it doesn't mean that the market could be small or it could be big, but it's the fact that it's a way for people to engage, right? But again, we live in a world where, we're all, we have to be practical, right? And so we're going to be seeing, and I think there was, I did speak to a project, I can't remember what it's called, but they're actually creating this sort of passport layer ID for different, for different DAOs. And the way they're doing it is that, these people who contribute to these DAOs, they have this sort of passport, and this passport records their credentials. But that is, I'd say, less compliance, but more of a way for DAOs to bring in great people. But yeah, I mean, it's a very loaded question that I wish there was an answer to.